Welcome to Canada's podcast.
Business leaders, ready to cut costs and boost growth with a recurring billing solution that's built for you? Our platform won't just save you money, it'll help you grow so that you make more money. Bill clearly, grow quickly with Visibill. To calculate your savings, head to visibill.com today.
Hi, I'm Phil Bliss, founder and CEO of Canada's podcast, coming to you today from Toronto. Today we're going to meet Clive Kinross, who's CEO of Propel Holdings. Clive is a seasoned entrepreneur with a history of building successful and innovative technology businesses. Clive founded Propel in 2011 with a mission to provide access to credit for underserved customers overlooked by traditional banks. Clive is an accountant by trade, but an entrepreneur by heart. Over the last decade, Propel has helped over 1 million customers access credit, and in doing so has achieved profitable and sustainable growth. So Clive, welcome to Canada's podcast. So Clive, welcome to Canada's podcast. Great to meet you. I looked at your bio and I think we're going to have an interesting conversation. So before we get into that conversation, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about who you are, how you got here, and what you're doing now?
Yeah, fantastic. And by the way, great to meet you as well, Philip. And thanks so much for the invitation. I'm really delighted to be here this morning. Hopefully the viewers and the listeners know that I wasn't given any questions in advance. So to the extent that my answers don't appear to be well rehearsed, that's because they're not well rehearsed. Again, my name is Clive Kinross, born and raised in South Africa. I'm a chartered accountant by profession. I did my articles of traineeship at Arthur Andersen in South Africa, in Johannesburg. I think in my graduating year, the last day of my articles, the last official day, I resigned. Didn't necessarily have aspirations to be an auditor or an accountant, but had aspirations to use the training, which I use every day, in the way I think about business. I left South Africa in the late 90s after a short stint in private equity, following my articles of traineeship, and left because South Africa I felt was a dangerous place to grow up in, and didn't want to have kids over there. And my wife and I decided that it's better to look elsewhere. We traveled around the world for roughly a year. I think we arrived in Canada in May, and a bunch of people told us that it gets cold in this part of the world, and what that could be like to live in. We didn't believe them. We just liked the country and the people and the culture, and decided to come and move to Canada. We put in our papers, and about 8 or 9 months later, arrived here. I did a short stint in merchant banking in Canada in my mid-20s, and decided that my disposition was better suited to be an entrepreneur and an operator than an investor. At which point I met a gentleman by the name of Michael Stein, who's my partner to this day. Michael had just taken CapREIT public on the Toronto Stock Exchange. He was the founding chairman and CEO of that business. And it was the late 90s. You know, the internet was really starting to surface at the time. There were some interesting applications for it. And Mike and I had a relatively loose understanding that he was going to back me to start an internet business. Obviously, we got to know one another. He believed in me. Hopefully, to this day, he still believes in me. I think he does. And all of that culminated in the formation of a company called OpenLane. OpenLane went on to be an industry leader in the used vehicle distribution business. Used cars historically have sold at a wholesale level through brick and mortar auto auctions. And I looked at that industry and thought with the advent of the internet, we could reimagine how used cars get distributed in such a way that there's huge value adds for both the buyers of used cars, which is car dealerships, as well as the sellers of used cars, which is typically institutional sellers like Ford Motor Credit, GMAC, Chrysler Financial, American Honda Finance, GE Capital, Wheels, ARI, Hertz, Budget, Avis, you name it. It's a big industry, as you can appreciate. And started that business in 2000, grew it to an industry leader, also following a merger in 2006. Worked with a lot of venture capital investors from Silicon Valley, mainly by virtue of the merger with the company out of Palo Alto. We were taking that company public on the NASDAQ in '08, and unfortunately, the window closed on us as we were getting set to go on the road to raise money for that company. And instead of doing that, really did a big reduction in force at the end of '08 as the automotive industry was hit by a hard time. So what was going to be kind of the highlight of my business journey turned out into a reduction in force where we terminated or reduced roughly 200 people from a 600-person company. We went to 400 people. We got the company from relatively deep into the red following the global financial crisis back into the black in early 2009. And that business was ultimately sold to Car Holdings for just over $250 million, which was a percentage of what the business was worth, supposedly worth just a few years prior, but nonetheless a good result for what was an incredibly challenging company to build, but one which is relevant today. And Open Lane today is the way most vehicles used vehicles at a wholesale level are transacted in North America. We had offices in Toronto, we had offices in Phoenix, we had offices in Palo Alto. I had customers all over the place. I probably spent the best part of 12 years, Philip, working 10 to 12 hours a day. I was absolutely exhausted after that. Took some time off, and then decided that the only thing that I really know how to do is start businesses. I didn't think that I was particularly employable at that point, and had learned a lot in building Open Lane, and decided I wanted to start another business from scratch, build the culture, build the team. The only problem was I didn't have an industry that I'd earmarked, and decided that I was comfortable enough stepping out of automotive, despite the fact that I had, lots of relationships and built up a network in that area. And unlike Open Lane, which was a transformational business model, this go around, I said, no transformational business model. Let me take a business model that's somewhat proven in a big underserved market, and do it 5 or 10% better than everybody else, and grow an industry leader in the process. Fintech lending was just taking off at the time. The underserved consumer market comprises roughly 100 million consumers in North America. Banks and credit unions don't lend to them. They were left with very few alternatives, mainly payday loans, which were less than optimal from a consumer standpoint. And I figured with the use of world-class technology, an incredible team, excellent risk adjudication, and so on, even though we were relatively late to that game, we could build an industry leader. So back in 2011, just over 12 years ago, pulled together an outstanding founding team, all of whom are with me today. And we started a company that went on to be called Propel. And what Propel does is it's a fintech company that provides access to credit to underserved and underbanked consumers in both Canada and the US. But the company, again, has been growing steadily over the last 12 years. We took it public in 2021. And not only have we been growing the top line, we've also, and I've also always had a view that you need to grow profitably. So the company's been profitable since 2015 and paying a dividend. This year, we expect to grow our revenues from $230 million last year to about $315 to $345 million this year. And we expect our profits to double from $15 million last year to roughly $30 million this year. That's certainly the guidance we've given to the streets. And if anything, we've never been in a better position to continue to fuel our growth on a go-forward basis.
Canada's podcast, the #1 podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. So, Clive, I'm interested here because you've started things, and to many listeners, it would be, holy crap, this guy does the big things. Okay. But you did start them. How did you get from that startup to big?
Yeah, it's a great question, and let me start off by telling you one of my favorite expressions, which is the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So, I think the first thing that I learned relatively early on is that, if you're driven and if you're ambitious and if you're hardworking, irrespective of what the business is that you get into, you're probably going to work 10, 12 hours a day, certainly in the formative years of one's career. And I think what a lot of people do when they're young is they don't necessarily have the boldness and the vision to think about creating a big business in a big industry that's got a long runway. From my perspective, where Mike was really informative in my early years, is he said to me, Clive, you're going to work really hard at the end of the day. Let's pick a big industry. Let's pick a big industry where we could grow a big business that's got a lot of runway. What so many people do when they're young in their career is they don't necessarily think about the right industry and they're not necessarily thinking boldly enough about it. So early on in my career, I got that advice, and that helped me think about what was the business I wanted to start. And there were a few key elements of the industry. The one is it needed to be big, it needed to be underserved, and it needed to be ripe either for change or ripe for another entrant to a big market that could handle another entrant. So those were all some of the fundamentals, and the starting point, the net is the starting point, is to pick a big industry that could grow into something big. Make a plan, and know ultimately that the business can grow and evolve into a big business over time. And then set milestones for you, and then set goals and milestones for yourself. Always with a view to growing a big long-term business. And I think in many instances that means more investment up front in people, for example, or in technology than you would otherwise take if you didn't have that vision. But provided you have that vision and that outlook, and you have the capital to support your plan, ultimately, that's how you eat an elephant one bite at a time.
So, based on your story today, you faced some unexpected challenges. How have you learned to handle those and come out on the other side?
I've faced a lot of unexpected challenges, a lot. Over a business career that spans over roughly 25 years in Canada alone. Yeah. The formation of two industry-leading companies, both of which are valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars from the ground up. I can tell you, Philip, it didn't just happen without challenges along the way. And I've learned a few things. The first thing I've learned is to never give up. And let me say that again, to never, ever, ever give up. Even if you're just kind of hanging on by a thread, which is certainly what it's felt like from time to time, either emotionally or fiscally, never ever give up. So that would be number one. And I think that characteristic is something that's defined me in many aspects of my life since I was a young kid, for better or for worse. And I think it served me well from a business perspective. The other thing I've learned to do when there are challenges, you need to come up with a plan. And the best way to come up with a plan is to pull the team together, to disseminate what the challenges are, and to figure out with the team how to come up with the appropriate plan. Typically, that will involve a couple of days, sometimes in a boardroom, sometimes out of town, depending on what the case may be. Develop a plan. Once I've got the plan developed, I'll generally speaking feel a little bit calmer, and then thoroughly go about executing on the plan, given the challenges and given the environment. And invariably, depending on the challenges, there's lots and lots of things to do. There's lots of hard work to do, which entails from a leader not only making sure the team is motivated, but also holding them accountable. And more often than not, taking on the biggest and most difficult challenges myself. In other words, leading from the front rather than just being a cheerleader or a motivator.
Business leaders, ready to cut costs and boost growth with a recurring billing solution that's built for you? Our platform won't just save you money, it'll help you grow so that you make more money. Bill clearly, grow quickly with Visibill. To calculate your savings, head to visibill.com today.
If you go back about 25 years when you're starting things, what advice would you give yourself now that you've got some great experience? What would you drop? What would you like to have started with, if you like?
You know, in those days, companies, founders were taking their companies public based on a little bit of revenue, based on a big market opportunity, and based on big losses. And there wasn't kind of a week that went by where I didn't read about some entrepreneur whose net wealth was $20 million or $50 million or $150 million based on little more than an idea. And I consequently went into that period of my life with those expectations. And as a consequence of that, when we got started, I think the internet bubble burst in 2002, a couple of years after we had started. Yeah, so that opportunity went by the wayside. And it took me a long time, I suppose, to emotionally adjust to that. I had this expectation that within 2, maybe 3 years, we would take the company public and I'd be worth a fortune of money. And that was certainly one of my driving forces was personal wealth creation. And I had to learn the hard way, and I'm talking now more emotionally than anything else, to be patient. And be patient doesn't mean not working with urgency and working my heart out each and every day. It means just be patient that the end goal and building a business and an infrastructure and team and customers and processes is not something that happens overnight. And in a more normalized world, it takes years to build value in a company and to recognize that value. So I think with that said, I would say to myself, Clive, be patient, work hard, think fast, but be patient and don't have unrealistic expectations. I think that would have saved me a lot of peace of mind over the years.
That's cool. It's really interesting to hear that. I mean, and that's really great advice to pass on. On that advice side, what's the best piece of advice that you've received along the way that, you carry around in your back pocket? It's always there, kind of thing. I've had a couple of gems, but
yeah, look, I think a lot of people focus on the what in business. What should we do? What market should we get into? What should the product look like? And I think the most important business decision anybody could make is not the what decision. It's actually the who decision. Who am I in business with? Who are my partners? Who are my co-founders? To me, the who is the critical part, because business is highly unpredictable. Industries change and industries evolve, and as a consequence of that, businesses change all the time. If you're surrounded by the right who, the right people with the right set of common values, with the right ambition, with the right focus, and very often different skill sets, then irrespective of what the market throws at you, you could adjust the business and find opportunities where otherwise you may not be able to find them. So to me, the who decision is absolutely the most critical decision at the end of the day. Friendships, kind of growing up, if you're friendly with people who don't necessarily have the same values as you, it's okay. Particularly in my experience, male friendships, which are based more around doing. We'll play sports together, we'll go watch sports together, we'll do stuff together, if you will. In business, where there's money involved, your values really get tested at the end of the day. And working with people with like-minded values, in my experience, has been a critical factor to success. So what I would say to any young aspiring entrepreneur is the most important decision you're going to make is the who decision. And if you don't get along with that person, irrespective of the potential wealth opportunity that you might think is happening in front of you, it will be a disaster in my experience. I haven't seen an instance where that's not the case, certainly from a founder's perspective.
Interesting. So some great lessons there. Some great listening, but let's move away from the serious side of it. Let's have a little bit of fun. You know, you were trained as an accountant. You know, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, what would you be doing instead?
Oh boy, you know that ship sailed, unfortunately, Philip. You know, as a young kid, I always had dreams of being a professional sportsman. Unfortunately, I didn't have the skill set. I was a pretty good athlete.
That was rugby, I assume.
Rugby, tennis. I wasn't actually that particular. It could have been anything. But if there was any kind of dream that I had, it was playing tennis at Centre Court Wimbledon. And if there's any aspirations that my parents had, it would have been their son Clive, the doctor, playing tennis at Centre Court Wimbledon. So none of that translated at the end of the day. My own aspirations were never to be a doctor, by the way. And the sight of blood scares me, if anything. But to be a professional sportsman would have been a really, really epic journey. Even when I watch it today, I'm kind of jealous when I see athletes performing at the highest level, particularly on the tennis court.
So what book are you currently reading, listening to, that you'd recommend to the audience?
You know, I've read a lot of books over the years. I'm going through a phase right now where I'm actually not reading a book, and I've probably been in that phase for a couple of years now. You know, if you said to me, what are some of the books that have really changed the way I think about things over the years? Certainly, Good to Great was an exceptional book, and highly recommend that. As I do Built to Last. I loved many years ago a book called Straight from the Gut. It was a Sandy Will story. I loved the Andre Agassi story. That was an incredible book. I loved the Steve Jobs book. I saw watching CNBC that Walter Isaacson's just written a book now about Elon Musk, and he's an incredible writer. So I'm looking forward to read that one. But I'm finding,
yeah, I think this could be a good book. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I'm finding in this environment, I don't know whether it's because we're overloaded with technology and media coming from everywhere, that most of the reading I'm doing is shorter articles. I read The Economist religiously from back to front. I think it's exceptionally well written, and gives a more call it thorough assessment as to what's going on in the world.
Bit more fun. Are you a morning or a night person?
Both. I'm both. You know, yeah. I love being the first one up in the morning in the house. I'm typically up at 6 o'clock in the morning. The first thing that I do is I open up my email. I like to clear any quick emails I can, particularly if I'm holding anybody up who's waiting to hear from me about something. I'd like to get them moving ASAP. I'll do that over a couple of double espressos before I religiously have my workout every day. Try to work out 7 days a week, more for my mind than anything else. And I love nights as well. I love coming home at night, having a nice meal, either watching the latest Netflix show or alternatively watching a sporting event or picking up on the news. It's another very important part of my day, and I'm finding that my social calendar is also exceptionally full. I need to do a better job of managing that, frankly, because sometimes it's a little bit too full. But my life's full, and frankly, I love it that way.
Great. If you had to pick one word to describe yourself, what would it be, and why?
Intense. If you said to me, why am I tense? It's just the way that I'm wired. You know, I've always been that way. I've always been highly competitive, Philip. I think when I was growing up, I viewed my competitive nature, which stood me in very good stead even as a youngster, but somehow I viewed it as a trait or an attribute that had negative connotations. It's not something that I loved about myself. As I've gotten older, I think that competitiveness, which is what's behind the intensity, has actually served me very well. I've learned how to embrace it over my call it, more recent years, and I've learned how to make it work for me and not work against me, which is something else that it's done over the years. And if you said to me how, I think I've just mellowed out a little bit over the years, and there's a little bit more calm and a little bit more wisdom, as well as obviously the same intense streak.
So last thing, what's keeping you up at night?
I'm a dad, I think first and foremost, if you said what's my identity, it's a father. I've got two beautiful kids. My daughter Talia is 24 and my son Jacob is 20. And obviously their well-being is something that's kept me up at night since the day they were born. And now that they're older, I have different things that keep me up with each of them, but doesn't stop keeping me up, number one. Number two, believe it or not, I think a lot about my family back in South Africa. I think in hindsight, the decision that we made to come to Canada 25 odd years ago was the right one. There was a period of time where it didn't feel like the right one, but now more so than ever, it's the right one. And folks in South Africa are really, really struggling. There's not a month that goes by that I don't hear about somebody else that's struggling. And we do all we can to help, but more than that, it keeps me up. It keeps me up and certainly weighs me down a little bit. And more than that, the business is what keeps me up at night all the time. The business is like another child. I don't stop thinking about it from two perspectives. First of all, maybe more than two perspectives, the people. At the end of the day, my number one job is kind of call it the chief people officer. And I need to make sure that my people are the right people in the right positions and are motivated and are doing the right kind of work. So people's critical. The other aspect that's critical to me is strategy. And strategy right now in a macro economy that's uncertain at best, in a world where there's wars and tremendous uncertainty, all of which could have knock-on effects for our business. From my perspective, first and foremost, from a strategic standpoint, I'm managing the risks, of which there are several that I need to think about and manage. And on the other hand, also manage the opportunities. And I manage the opportunities mainly by making sure that I've got outstanding people in place to be able to execute on those opportunities, while I'm finding most of my work is more on the risk management side as distinct from driving the growth opportunity side. And at this stage of my career, feeling like I'm doing a really, really good job of balancing everything. Balancing all of those variables. Have been other stages of my life where, frankly, I've leaned in too heavily in one area or another for an extended period of time, to the point that I don't think it was healthy, not for me, nor for the people that I serve around me.
Clive, it's been super meeting you. Just been very, very interesting. I think some gems in there in terms of advice and things like that. Someone's listening. How can people get a hold of you online? What's the best way?
So Philip, I'm the CEO, as you know, of Propel Holdings. My email is clive.kinross@propelholdings.com. Every once in a while, I do have a budding entrepreneur getting in touch with me and would love to come in and speak and get some advice to the extent that my advice could be helpful. Philip, I'm always happy and honored to do that, and frankly, very flattered to do that. If there's any way that I could give back through my experience over the years, I'm only too delighted to do that. So Would encourage folks to reach out to the extent that they do have any questions. On the one hand, and on the other hand, also to recognize that I'm busy. So if I can't prioritize them today, it doesn't mean that I won't prioritize them at all. And for all those budding entrepreneurs out there, I would say that the road less traveled, besides the potential financial windfall from it, the wisdom and life experiences that one accumulates being an entrepreneur is really exceptional. So if you've got adventure in your blood and the thirst for knowledge and curiosity, it really is a fascinating journey. And don't forget to enjoy that part of the journey as well.
Clive, thanks for coming on Canada's podcast. It's been a delight to have you.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Philip. Really appreciate the time and the outstanding questions. I've thoroughly enjoyed it as well.
Well, some gems of wisdom from Clive, and I really think a terrific session. So once again, I'm Phil Bliss. Thanks for listening to Canada's podcast, where you meet the entrepreneurs that drive Canada's economy. See you soon.
Business leaders, ready to cut costs and boost growth with a recurring billing solution that's built for you? Our platform won't just save you money, it'll help you grow so that you make more money. Bill clearly, grow quickly with Visibill. To calculate your savings, head to visibill.com today.
Canada's podcast, the #1 podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs.